Hi, I'm Nicole Ferraro, and this is The Divide, a podcast from Light Reading exploring the ongoing digital divide, why and where it still exists, and what needs to be done to get people everywhere connected to reliable, high-speed internet. My guest today is Gigi Sohn, Executive Director of the American Association for Public Broadband, or AAPB. She returns to the podcast to discuss the dark money influences seeking to squash public broadband networks before they can get off the ground, and specifically why those campaigns have successfully killed networks in certain towns like Longmeadow, Massachusetts, but have failed in other areas like Bountiful, Utah. We also discuss the rising role of private equity in helping to defeat public broadband networks and what resources are needed to fight against the influence of dark money opposition to public broadband on the ground. And we close out with a discussion on the state of the BEAD program and whether municipal networks can fill in BEAD's inevitable gaps. All right. Gigi, welcome back to the podcast. What a delight to see you today. How's it going?
It's going great, and it's always great when I'm on your podcast, Nicole. So thank you for inviting me back. I appreciate it.
Well, that's so kind of you to say. I really appreciate it. It is always a treat to have you on. So today we're going to be talking primarily about public broadband. I will remind everyone that you're the executive director of the American Association for Public Broadband, right? Not of, it's for, right? Okay. AAPB. You've been on this podcast before to talk about public broadband and your organization and different communities that are trying to launch municipal broadband networks and the like. And we've also talked about the dark money campaigns, as you call them, that are trying and successfully, in some cases, trying to squash these networks. So we're going to talk a little bit about that specifically and broadly in terms of what we're seeing with these campaigns, where they're successful, where they're not. But we recently on Light Reading and other publications as well covered the example of Longmeadow, Massachusetts, which was moving toward launching its own fiber network until the town voted against funding this month. It is May when you and I are speaking. It may be June when this publishes, but that happened in May. And that was following the influence of a dark money campaign led by Mass Priorities, which is part of the Domestic Policy Caucus. And those are suspected to have some ties to incumbent cable providers. We'll get into that. But we've also seen some other cities and towns like Bountiful, Utah, for example, overcome those kind of dark money campaigns. So I want to get to what the difference is between a town like Bountiful and a town like Longmeadow, for example. But just to start off, since the Longmeadow situation was pretty recent and they may take another stab at it, I'm just curious why you think that campaign to defeat the public network was successful there based on what we know so far. What are some lessons learned for the town if they choose to try again?
So if I could toot my own horn, AAPB and I did not find out about this until, frankly, it was too late, until it was about 4 days before the town vote, where they had to get 2/3 of the people showing up to vote in favor of this. And the dark money campaign had been running for a very, very long time. So in Bountiful, we were brought in early. We had a bunch of ads. I had an op-ed in the Salt Lake Tribune that was seen all over the state and, frankly, all over the country. And as a result, we were able to defeat it. So we got brought in too late. I'm not going to stand here and say I could have saved it, APB could have saved it, but I think it would have been helpful. The second reason was that in Bountiful, it was a grassroots campaign that convinced the town council to vote on a 5-0 basis to own their own infrastructure. Okay, so it came from the ground up. Mm-hmm. In Longmeadow, there was a town selectman who I've spoken to a number of times, wonderful guy, Vineeth Hevamarty, and he had a wild hair. Okay, sometimes that works, by the way. It worked in Winchester, Maryland. But here, he said he went door to door and he talked to people in the town. And the price and the lack of choice in internet access, they had a choice of Comcast or Comcast, was something that just constantly came up. But he didn't have the grassroots support necessary. And the barrier is very high, okay? Because, again, you had to get 2/3 of people who showed up to a town meeting, and who knows how many people the dark money folks got out. Comcast is famous for bringing people and sometimes paying them to come to meetings. They would have to be citizens of the town, but who knows, right? So you didn't have that grassroots support that you had in Bountiful. So I think that's a very big difference.
Definitely.
The third reason that I see is that Longmeadow, the financial proposal, which, by the way, was rejected twice by the Finance Committee, that's not necessarily a good sign,
right. Okay.
was to actually raise people's property taxes.
Okay.
And I think and that didn't happen in Bountiful. In Bountiful, they used municipal bonds, right? They sold bonds. And I think when you start talking about raising people's taxes, no matter how good the reason for raising them, that gets people's hackles up. And I think it also becomes easier to attack.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. From my conversations, it sounded like there was a large misunderstanding in terms of the amount that their taxes were going up, but still, it's very hard.
Right. And again, the dark money groups, prey on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Finally, and this was not in Bountiful, there was a private equity backed ISP. The name is escaping me.
Gateway Fiber, backed by CBRE.
Okay. Thank you very much. Gateway Fiber, backed by CBRE. That was also in the mix. And they, claim not to have supported Domestic Policy Council. However, they were doing their own magic. And it's interesting because even in the short time in which when I was engaged in social media, I could see there were certain people that were very, very vocal about particularly about the funding part, right? So the funding part, I think, was really the thing, to the extent that there really was a legitimate vote, of people not, pushed there by the dark money forces, that kind of spooked people that their taxes were going to go up. This is not a good time to tell people that their costs are going up.
Why?
I can't imagine why. So I think it was a confluence of those things, all very different than what happened in Bountiful, to kind of scotch this idea. Now, my understanding is they can bring it up again. I also am getting messages from people who say, well, there's ways of doing this that gets around the town meeting and all that. So I think they need to explore how they can get this done. I also understand that Gateway Fiber was also very active in a neighboring town of Northampton, famously the home of Smith College, and, very kind of, crunchy granola place. It's a great place if you've never been there. Also were successful in defeating a public broadband network there.
Okay. And, the point you make about the grassroots, I think, is notable, because one thing that I had asked the town officials I spoke to in Longmeadow was why, leaving out Bountiful, which is in Utah, obviously, but in Western Massachusetts, there are multiple examples of hill towns that successfully did this. And the officials suggested to me that because in Longmeadow, it was a town vote versus, a council vote in some of these other places, it was easier to misinform the town versus maybe a council that might, expect to get lobbied by the cable providers and such. It is a slightly anti-democratic point of view on why it failed, but do you think that plays a role too in terms of how the vote is structured in these municipalities?
Oh, absolutely. And I said that in a LinkedIn post, is that the fact you have to get 2/3, it's not a majority. Okay.
Right.
They didn't get a majority either. Okay. They got soundly defeated.
Literally soundly. There was a massive round of applause from the crowd after they were
defeated. But a 2/3 majority, boy, that is an awfully high barrier to overcome. And I think, again, I don't know if Vineeth talked to some of those other towns to see how they did it. Because I've gotten, messages, there are ways to just do it through a town council vote. I think they should consider doing that. But in any event, it's a very, very, very high barrier. And if there are ways around that, I think there was talk about doing a ballot initiative, which again, you only need 50.1% for a ballot initiative.
Right.
So that's another
Right.
possibility. Two
Why,
thirds, boy.
why not the
Even what's that?
Sorry. Yeah. No, I was going to say, why not so like you mentioned, this is requiring the raising of property taxes. Why wouldn't Longmeadow be able to pursue the municipal bond route, like
I
Bountiful?
don't
For any
know.
reason?
I don't think it's a. I don't think it's a poor community.
Right.
I'm not that familiar with it. Northampton sure is not a poor community.
Right.
But I don't think it's not like the community I just visited in the Louisiana Delta, which was dirt poor. But no, I don't think it's that poor community. It's probably just something, they were advised by consultants who told them that this was the way to go. And it was obviously not the way to go. And I think it's much harder to defeat a proposal that doesn't take money out of the residents' pockets.
Yeah, for sure. And that's really the main reason I wanted to have this conversation today, because I think we're starting to see, this is like a pattern is now in place in terms of when these communities seek to go launch these networks, these dark money campaigns get in gear, get their people in the town and stuff. And so there needs to be some, takeaways and lessons learned on what's working and what isn't, and how to beat back these campaigns. And obviously your organization plays a key role in helping to figure that out. You mentioned the role of private equity here. And as I said, it was Gateway Fiber in this region. And they did say to me that they did not put any funding behind it, but they did put out this blog post encouraging residents to vote against the measure to fund the network. And as you suggest, had other, people in the field likely to helping to defeat this. But I want to talk about, because it's thus far, our focus has been on the incumbent cable providers as the forces behind these anti-public broadband campaigns. But are you concerned that private equity is going to start to play a larger role here, especially as they're not necessarily a threat to the cable providers who probably are planning to gobble them up at some point, these small broadband providers? What's your sense?
Well, I've been very public about the fact that I'm not, as a general rule, anti-private equity. They're getting into bowling alleys. As much as I love to bowl, do I really care? Not really. I mean, I do care that they seem to be boasting about unilaterally raising prices to go bowling, but that doesn't keep me up at night.
Right.
But having control of critical infrastructure does keep me up at night.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen what private equity has done to newspapers.
Yeah.
Look, the goal of private equity is to wring as much return on investment out of an asset,
Mm-hmm.
And cut costs, right? But in doing so, right, that's one of the ways that you wring the maximum amount of return on investment. And then if it doesn't work out, you sell it for piece parts. I mean, it's the way it operates, right?
Yeah.
It's not illegal in this country. But I think we really need to think about whether we want private equity buying up the kind of infrastructure that we need to live a full life and to flourish. And so I'm against private equity owning. I don't, if they want to have a minority investment, I guess I'm okay with that. I could live with that. But actually having full ownership over broadband or TV stations or, newspapers, no. It's just too important for society that these networks thrive. And I think the threat is more to the cable operators who are not doing so great right now. We know that Charter lost $8 billion in value not that long ago.
Right.
I think the greater threat is that private equity buys them as opposed to vice versa. So that's not good. I may be critical of Comcast
Yeah.
more maybe than your average cable company, but I don't want to see private equity buying them. I think that would be a total disaster. So again, when it comes to critical communications infrastructure, and frankly, critical infrastructure of any kind, I mean, I'm sure there's private equity in energy right now. Again, I'm not an expert, but I'm just going to take a wild guess
I think that's
that
fair.
when it comes to energy, there's private equity in there. Again, investments to help the majority owner, get their networks built and that sort of thing. I'm not troubled by, but majority ownership, I'm deeply troubled by.
Yeah. Yeah. And have we seen private equity pop up in these campaigns elsewhere, or is this the
Not
first?
yet, not
Okay.
yet.
Yeah.
But
Well,
again, the private equity ownership of broadband networks is something that is accelerating right now. I think it's a more recent phenomenon the last couple of years. Also, you're just seeing enormous consolidation,
yeah.
in the, among small broadband providers. For a while, I sat on the board of Two Cows, which owns Ting, which has, been, it's a great ISP, and they partner with communities, but they've been struggling for years and have been looking for, for ways out. It's a common thing right now. And I'm not sure it's sustainable to have all these little ISPs, but
Sure.
I would get really, really worried if a bunch of them got gobbled up by private equity.
Right. And I think you're, speaking to all the more reason that public broadband networks are important, because we can't really trust these, what's going to happen with these little providers that are coming into these towns and acting like, family run companies that are owned by
Oh
massive.
yes, we're in the, we're part of the community. Look, I hate, as much as I obviously am an evangelist for public broadband networks, I hate that, the entrance of private equity into this space, and constantly we're seeing failures in the BEAD program, probably will lead more people to build public networks. It doesn't actually give me any joy to
Sure.
see this happening.
Right. Okay, we're going to get to BEAD in a second, but before we do, just in terms of these dark money campaigns swooping in to defeat public broadband networks every time they try to get to the starting line, what resources do you think are needed both at your organization, AAPB, and at the local level to be able to, rapidly respond or have the resources in place to snap into action rather than being caught, on the back foot waiting for these things to come in, certainly involving your organization sooner.
Well, I'll never pass up the opportunity to encourage people to join. Okay. I mean, look, I'm a voice. We're a voice that gets listened to. We've been successful where we've been brought in early enough. I can name a half a dozen places where we've beaten, in fact, this particular organization, the Domestic Policy Council. I love these anodyne names they have, right? So please join. We're a membership organization, and the money ain't flowing as well as we would like. So please come join us. Also, if you know of something like this happening somewhere, let us know. Let me know.
Yeah.
I'm not hard to find.
Yes.
I'm pretty ubiquitous. So it was interesting because, again, on LinkedIn, I saw a woman I've known for years, decades, who's a professor. I think she's at Smith, or at Amherst, complaining about what was going on in Northampton. And I felt like saying, Lee,
Yeah.
why don't you tell me about this? So let us know. Give us the heads up. Where we've been successful, Kentucky was another place where there was a senator trying to make the Frankfurt municipal plant sell off its, communications network, which it had for 70 years and had a 65% take rate.
Right.
Like, duh, we got involved. We knocked the guy down. He went away. So it doesn't take that much. A lot of what it takes is for a local reporter, to ask these people, who funds you?
Right.
Like, well, I don't have to tell you. Well, okay. Well, you just told me.
Yeah, exactly.
As far as the community is concerned, look, and this is how I advise every single community that's looking to do this, because almost every single community that is looking to do this, that has any kind of, population, the dark money is going to come in. Okay. Is that you have got to get the community behind you first. That is the first thing you do before you go to the town council, before you even do an RFP, whatever. You get the community behind you. So whatever resources it takes, do that is what you've got to do. It cannot be the other way around. Now, I've seen it work the other way around. So the town of Wilmar, Minnesota, I remember I spoke at a conference, the C-band conference, which is Community Broadband Action Network, is a fellow organization of ours. I spoke at their conference, and this woman came up to me and she said, "Oh yeah, we're having this fight in Wilmar." I said, "Really? Is your community behind you?" She's like, "Oh, we have to do that?" Now they succeeded. They have an open access network now, and they have this great guy, Kyle Box, who got him there. But that's backwards.
Yeah.
The way to do it is get the grassroots support first, and then you move forward with this. And you say to the incumbents, we want universal connectivity at X, and we want a low income offering at X price. Are you willing to give us that? And 99 times out of 100, the incumbents will say, no, here's what we'll give you, and you're welcome.
Totally. Yes. I think that's such a sound point. It probably solves, a majority of the problem here. Educating the town on the community on the benefits of what they're going to be getting, and also to expect that they're about to get, an onslaught of negative campaign literature and calls and such, like prepare them for that so that, I think, that makes total sense to me.
One other thing, Nicole, let me mention that was done in Bountiful. When, the door knockers from the Utah Taxpayers Association basically lied, we're with the government, we support the fiber program. The town council called several town meetings to explain to people what they were hearing and what the reality was. I don't think that was done there. So Vineeth, to his credit, did a lot of social on Facebook, explaining what was going on, but that's not enough. You've got to actually bring people there. And again, this is the way you get grassroots support, saying, look at these outsiders, this Minnesota dark money group trying to defeat our local autonomy. You get them in a room and you get people riled up. And then I think, again, would that have worked? I don't know. But I think that that was a thing that was extremely helpful and Bountiful. But, they did a slide presentation, walked them through it, got people like, what the hell are these outsiders doing? Trying to take away our autonomy. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly. Okay, so before I let you go, let's have a quick word on BEAD. It's May 27th, 2026. We've been talking about BEAD since the early 1900s. Where we sit right now, some work is kind of starting. At the same time, half the funding for the program remains up in the air. And one state so far, Nebraska, has already said it will need to do another round of bidding because 3 of its providers dropped out. I think we'll see more of that. So how are you feeling about the state of BEAD right now? And are you still seeing opportunities for public broadband to step in and close the gaps left behind, whether because BEAD is leaving areas unserved or because they're delivering a lower quality connectivity?
So like every other broadband nerd, I'm waiting for with bated breath for the non-deployment funding guidance to come out. And I understand it's not even going to come out in June. I hope NTIA proves me wrong. I know the rumors, Secretary of Commerce Lutnick didn't like what was presented to him in March. It wasn't sexy enough and blah, blah, blah. But meanwhile, these networks are starting to get built, and so if you're thinking about things like workforce or permitting or adoption, you need that money now, not in 6 months. Sometimes I wonder whether they just think people are going to forget about it. You're not going to forget about $22 billion. Okay. I mean, it's more than the deployment money. Then of course they're talking about, let's in this non-deployment money, let's have a rainy day fund for deployment. I'm like, I just want to pull my hair out. That's what the money was for. But okay, whatever. Because as you mentioned, you're now starting to see award winners saying, you know what, the cost of fiber, because of the war, because of tariffs, the cost of fiber has gone up. The cost
data centers,
all the costs gone up. I can't afford to do this at the benefit of the bargain price. Okay, remember, and I know your audience knows, the rules were changed because the Biden administration didn't get the money out when they should have. Okay, the rules were changed under the Trump administration to basically focus on who can bid the lowest. And that's why satellite has gotten so many awards, which unclear whether they're going to accept the awards. In fact, one of the entities, one of the companies that said no thanks, but no thanks was Kuiper, which by the way is vaporware. It doesn't even
it doesn't exist. I can
This is mind blown, right? So unfortunately, and there's other issues. So another issue that I've had a wild hair about is that NTIA and their subgrantee agreements are saying to co-ops and munis, you must abide by FCC pole attachment rules. And even though they are specifically exempted in Section 214 of the Communications Act, and not so much the munis, but the co-ops are really in a snit about this. And a number of them, particularly in places like Colorado, Missouri, are saying, we're gonna turn down our awards if we're forced to do this. So, I fear, and again, you're already starting to see it, and I think you're going to see more of it, is even before there are defaults, we can talk about defaults because those are going to happen too.
For sure. Yeah, right? These are just not signing contracts.
Defaults, yeah. And then, okay, so what happens next? Is there another bidding round? Do you go to the entity that bid the next least in the Bob round? I mean, who knows? All I know is Congress intended this $42 billion to close the digital divide, and that's not going to happen with what's going on right now. And again, I'm bipartisan in my criticism,
for sure,
of how this program has progressed or not, because the passage of time is not meaningless.
No, and
companies go out of business. Desires change, prices go up, prices go down. So the fact that it's taken this long, we are not in 2021 or 2022 anymore. It's a halfway through 2026. So I just think, look, I was a big fan. I think it was Senators Bennett and Ben Ray Lujan had a bill back in the day. I think it was like in 2020 or in 2019 that would set up an infrastructure bank that would lend money at low cost to entities that wanted to build in rural areas. I still think that's a really good idea and something we ought to revisit again, because these programs where the government just gives money away, they seem to always fall short, and it's disappointing. Look, I worked on the infrastructure bill. I helped to sell the BEAD program to my colleagues in the public interest community. So I have even though this may end up being better for public broadband, I sort of have a personal ownership in this program, and I'm bummed out to see it not accomplish what it was supposed to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's well said. It is certainly a bummer. And, obviously there were things baked into the infrastructure law, like the need to create the broadband map before any of this could get allocated. And there were delays baked into the BEAD program from the start that get misunderstood broadly by the press that talks about this. But the Biden administration should have hustled at the end there to start getting
should have hustled at the beginning, middle, and end.
Certainly at the end, but probably throughout. Yeah, it's a fair criticism. Okay. As much as I want to chat with you for the rest of the day, I'm going to set you free to go solve America's broadband challenges. And I'm going to work on getting this out to the world. Thank you so much, Gigi. Always a pleasure. You're amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicole. I really appreciate having me back on again. I can talk for days.
That's right. All right. Thank you. Thank you again, Gigi, for joining me. Thank you as well to Pierre Landriau for editing this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Light Reading Podcast for more episodes of The Divide, as well as interviews and insights from the Light Reading team. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.